The cargo bay smelled like engine oil and sweat. Tay wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and lifted another crate onto the transport platform. His muscles burned, but he did not complain. He never complained. That was the first rule of survival on the Ascendant Crown. The station floated in the darkness of space like a metal mountain. It was the heart of the Valari Dominion, home to the most powerful species in the known galaxy. The Valari were tall and beautiful, with silver skin and eyes that glowed like distant stars. They ruled over dozens of worlds and hundreds of species, and at the very bottom of their great empire, working in the shadows and the dirt, were the humans. Tay had been on the station for 3 years. He worked 16 hours a day, loading and unloading ships that came from every corner of the galaxy. The Valari barely noticed him. To them, he was just another human, another pair of hands to carry their things and clean their messes. They called his kind the youngest species, the weakest species. The species that had only learned to travel between stars 100 years ago. He did not argue with them. He did not look them in the eye. He simply worked, day after day, till his body was too tired to remember anything else. His friend Hyun worked beside him, cursing under his breath as he struggled with a heavy container. Haeon was shorter than Tay and talked twice as much. They had met on their first day at the station, 2 humans assigned to the same crew, and they had been inseparable ever since. "Did you hear?" Hyun said, pushing the container onto the platform. "The princess is coming today. The whole station is going crazy." Tay said nothing. He grabbed another crate and kept working. Princess Yunahan continued, ignoring TA's silence. "Daughter of High Chancellor Kale himself. They say she is the most beautiful woman in the Dominion. They say men have started wars just to win her smile. We have work to do," Tay said quietly. Haeyoon laughed. "You never change, do you? The whole galaxy could be on fire and you would just keep lifting boxes." A loud horn echoed through the cargo bay. The workers stopped and looked up. Through the massive windows above them, they could see a ship approaching the station. It was white and gold, covered in symbols that sparkled like diamonds. "The Royal Transport. She is here," someone whispered. The cargo bay doors opened, and a group of Valari guards marched inside. They wore armor that gleamed under the lights, and they carried weapons that could kill a man with a single shot. Behind them came more guards, then servants, then officials in flowing robes, and then she appeared. Princess Yuna walked like she owned the universe. Her silver hair fell past her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Her gown was the color of deep space, decorated with tiny lights that moved like living stars. Her face was cold and perfect, the face of someone who had never known hunger or fear or doubt. The workers dropped to their knees. Tay knelt with them, his eyes on the floor. The procession moved through the cargo bay, heading toward the main corridors of the station. But then something happened. One of the hover carriages that carried the princess's luggage made a strange sound and stopped moving. Sparks flew from its engine, and it crashed to the ground with a loud bang. The guards shouted orders. Servants ran in every direction. Princess Yuna stepped out of her own carriage and looked at the chaos with obvious annoyance. "Fix this immediately," she commanded. "I will not be late for the festival." Engineers rushed to repair the broken carriage, but it would take time. The princess stood in the middle of the cargo bay, surrounded by dirt and workers and the smell of oil. Her perfect nose wrinkled in disgust. Her eyes moved across the kneeling humans. And then they stopped on Tay. He had made a mistake. While everyone else stared at the floor, he had looked up. Just for a moment. Just long enough to meet her gaze. Her eyes were gold, bright, and sharp, like the edge of a knife. They locked onto his, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "You there?" she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Human, bow. When royalty passes." The cargo bay went silent. Everyone watched. Tay could feel Humed trembling beside him, terrified of what might happen next. Tay held her gaze for one more second. Something passed between them, something that the princess could not name. Then, slowly and deliberately, he bowed his head. Princess Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. She told herself it was disgust. This human was dirty and common, a creature from a primitive world that had barely learned to walk among the stars. He was nothing. Less than nothing, but those eyes. There was something in those eyes that she had never seen before. Not fear, not worship. Something else. Something that made her feel, for just a moment, like she was the one being judged. She turned away sharply and walked back to her carriage. The engineers had fixed the hover carriage, and the procession continued on its way. Within minutes, the cargo bay was empty again, and the workers returned to their tasks. Hyun grabbed Tae's arm, his face pale. "Are you insane?" You looked at her. You looked directly at a Valari princess. "Do you want to die?" Tae picked up a crate and placed it on the platform. "She asked me to bow." I bowed, after staring at her like you were her equal. "Do you know what they do to humans who disrespect nobility? They make examples of us, Tae. They hurt us in ways that last forever." Tae said nothing. He continued working, his face empty of emotion, but Haeon knew his friend well enough to see the truth. There was something different about Tae, something he kept hidden beneath his silence and his obedience. In 3 years, Haeon had never learned what it was. Tae never talked about his past, never talked about Earth, never talked about anything except the work in front of him. Sometimes, late at night, Haeon heard Tae whispering in his sleep, names, places, words that sounded like battle commands. And once, just once, Han had seen the scars on Tae's back when he changed his shirt. They were not the scars of a cargo worker. They were the scars of a soldier, but Han never asked. He knew that some secrets were too heavy to share. On the other side of the station, Princess Yuna arrived at her chambers and dismissed her servants. She stood alone in front of a mirror, staring at her own reflection. She could not stop thinking about the human in the cargo bay. It made no sense. He was nobody. He was nothing. In a few days, she would lift the blade of eternity and prove herself worthy of ruling the Dominion. She would marry Lord Voss and secure her family's power for another 1,000 years. She had no time to think about a dirty worker with strange eyes, but she thought about him anyway, and somewhere deep inside her. In a place she did not want to examine, she felt afraid. That night, the workers returned to their quarters in the lowest level of the station. The rooms were small and crowded, with beds stacked 3 high against the walls. The air was thick and warm, and the lights flickered every few minutes because the power systems were old and poorly maintained. Tae sat on his bed in the corner, away from the others. He held something small in his hands, turning it over and over between his fingers. It was a piece of metal, shaped like a shield with wings. The symbol of the United Earth Defense Corps. Hyun climbed down from the bed above and sat beside him. The other workers were already asleep, their snoring filling the room like distant thunder. "I need to talk to you," Xian said quietly, "about what happened today." Tae did not look up. He kept turning the metal piece in his hands. "You cannot do things like that," Hyun continued, looking at a princess. Meeting her eyes, "You are going to get yourself killed, and probably me too." "She will forget about it by morning," Tae said. "Maybe, maybe not. The Velar have long memories, especially when it comes to disrespect." And paused, looking at the object in Tae's hands. "What is that thing? You are always holding it, but you never tell me what it means." Tae was silent for a long moment. Then he opened his hand and let Hyun see the insignia clearly. The metal was scratched and worn, but the design was still visible. Wings spread wide around a shield, and inside the shield was the image of Earth. "It belonged to my unit," Tae said finally. "A long time ago." Hyun stared at him. "Your unit? You were a soldier." Tae closed his hand around the insignia again. His eyes were distant, looking at something far away, something that existed only in memory. "There was a war," he said quietly, 20 years ago. "Before you were born, the Valari Dominion sent a fleet to Earth. Not the whole Dominion, just a faction. Rogue nobles who thought humans were too dangerous to exist. They called it a cleansing." Yen felt cold. He had heard whispers about such things, rumors that passed between humans in dark corners. But he had always thought they were just stories. "What happened?" he asked. Tae's jaw tightened. "They burned our cities. They killed millions in the first week. We had nothing. Our ships were like toys compared to theirs. Our weapons could barely scratch their armor. Everyone thought it was the end. Everyone thought humanity would die. Paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder. But we did not die. We fought back. Every city, every street, every building. We learned their weaknesses. We built new weapons. We became something they never expected. Yuan high and breathed. Survived. Tay corrected. There is a difference. The siege of New Seoul lasted 8 months. I was there from the beginning to the end. When it was over, there were only 300 of us left out of 50,000. But the Valari fleet was gone. Every ship, every soldier. We destroyed them all. Hyun could not speak. He had known Tay for 3 years, worked beside him every day, shared meals and jokes and complaints. In all that time, he had been standing next to a man who had fought in a war that changed the galaxy. Why did I never hear about this? Hyun asked. Why does nobody talk about it? Tay smiled, but there was no happiness in it, because the Dominion erased it. They buried the records, silenced the witnesses, pretended it never happened. A lesser species defeating them in open war. That would destroy everything they believe about themselves. So they made the war disappear, and they made us disappear too. He looked at Haeon with tired eyes. That is why I am here. That is why I lift boxes and clean floors and bow to anyone who tells me to bow. Because I am tired, Hyun. I am tired of fighting. I am tired of killing. I came here to be forgotten, and I want to stay forgotten. Hyun nodded slowly. He understood now. The silence, the empty expressions, the way Tay moved through life like a ghost. He was not weak. He was broken. The war had taken everything from him, and he had nothing left except the need to be invisible. I will not tell anyone, Hyun promised. Your secret is safe with me. Tay looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you. They sat together in silence. 2 humans in the belly of an empire that despised them. Far above, in the royal section of the station, Princess Yuna could not sleep either. She stood by the window of her chamber, looking out at the stars. Tomorrow the Festival of Ascension would begin. Tomorrow she would stand before the Blade of Eternity and try to lift it from its altar. If she succeeded, she would be recognized as the rightful heir to her father's power. If she failed, she would be humiliated in front of the entire Dominion. The Blade had rejected every candidate for 3 generations. Princes and princesses, lords and ladies, warriors and scholars, all of them had tried, and all of them had failed. The weapon simply would not move. Some said the Blade was waiting for someone special. Others said it was broken, and the ritual was meaningless. Yuna did not know what to believe. She only knew that her whole life had been leading to this moment, and she was afraid. A knock came at her door. She turned and saw Lord Voss enter without waiting for permission. He was tall and handsome, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He smiled at her, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It never did. You should be resting, he said. Tomorrow is an important day. I am aware, Yuna replied. Voss walked closer, looking at her like a hunter looks at prey. Are you nervous? Worried that the Blade will reject you like it rejected all the others? Yuna kept her face calm. The Blade will do what it will do. I can only present myself in hope. Voss laughed softly. Hope. Such a weak word. Do you know what I think? I think the Blade is tired of weakness. I think it is waiting for someone strong enough to take it, not ask for it. He reached out and touched her chin, tilting her face up to look at him. When you fail tomorrow, do not worry. I will be there to lift the Blade in your place. And then you will be my wife, and we will rule together. You providing the bloodline? Me providing the strength? No. Yuna wanted to slap his hand away, but she controlled herself. Voss was dangerous. His family was powerful. She could not afford to make him her enemy. We shall see what tomorrow brings, she said carefully. Voss smiled again and left without another word. Yuna turned back to the window, her hands shaking with anger. She hated him. She hated this whole arrangement, this cage of duty and politics that trapped her since birth. She wanted to be more than a symbol, more than a bloodline, more than a prize to be won by arrogant men. But what could she do? She was Princess Yuna of the Valari Dominion. Her path had been chosen for her long before she was born. As she stared at the stars, her mind wandered to a strange place. She thought of the human in the cargo bay, the one who had looked at her without fear, the one whose eyes had made her feel for just a moment like all her titles and power meant nothing. Who was he? What was his story? She shook her head and pushed the thought away. He was just a human, just a commoner, just another invisible face in the crowd. She did not know that by tomorrow night, everything she believed would be shattered. And the man she dismissed as nothing would change her world forever, the great Hall of the Ascendant Crown was the most beautiful room in the galaxy. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds formed beneath it, soft and white like dreams made visible. The walls were covered in crystals that caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 rainbows. Golden banners hung between massive pillars, each one bearing the symbol of a noble family. Today the hall was filled with thousands of guests. Lords and ladies from every corner of the Dominion had come to witness the Festival of Ascension. They wore their finest clothes and their coldest smiles. Watching each other with the careful eyes of people who trusted no one, at the far end of the hall stood the altar. It was made of black stone, ancient, and covered with symbols that no one could read anymore. And resting on top of the altar was the Blade of Eternity. The weapon was simple in appearance, a straight sword with a silver handle and a blade that seemed to absorb the light around it. It looked almost ordinary, like something a soldier might carry into battle. But everyone in the room knew what it was. For 10,000 years, the blade had chosen the rulers of the Valari. It was said to contain the spirit of the first emperor, and it would only allow itself to be lifted by one who was truly worthy. Tay stood in the corner of the hall, wearing the plain white uniform of a servant. He carried a tray of drinks, moving between guests, with his eyes down and his steps silent. Hyun worked beside him, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. "I cannot believe we are here," Hyun whispered. "In the same room as the Blade of Eternity. My mother would cry if she could see this." Tay said nothing. He watched the crowd, noting the positions of the guards, the exits, the weapons hidden beneath fancy robes. Old habits. A soldier never stopped being a soldier, even when he wanted to forget. A horn sounded deep and powerful, and the room fell silent. High Chancellor Calais rose from his throne and spread his arms wide. "Welcome, honored guests, to the Festival of Ascension," he announced. His voice filled the hall like rolling thunder. "Today, the children of our greatest families will present themselves before the Blade, as it has been for 10,000 years. The Blade will judge their worth, and if one among them proves worthy, they will be recognized as the future ruler of our dominion." The crowd applauded politely. The ceremony began. One by one, the noble heirs approached the altar. A young lord from the Eastern Territories was first. He was tall and strong, with medals covering his chest. He climbed the steps, placed his hands on the blade, and pulled. Nothing happened. The blade did not move. It sat on the altar like it was made of stone, completely ignoring the young lord's efforts. His face turned red with effort and embarrassment. Finally, he released the handle and walked away, head bowed in shame. The next candidate was a lady from the southern provinces. She was elegant and graceful, famous for her intelligence and wisdom. She touched the blade gently, closed her eyes, and pulled. Nothing more. Candidates came. Princes and princesses, warriors and scholars, young and old. Each one tried. Each one failed. The blade rejected them all, refusing to move even a little bit. Tay watched with quiet interest. He had seen weapons like this before, during the war. Ancient technology mixed with things that humans did not understand. The Valari called it sacred. Humans called it alien. But whatever it was, it clearly had a mind of its own. Finally, it was Princess Yuna's turn. The crowd grew completely silent. Everyone leaned forward to watch. This was the moment they had been waiting for. the daughter of the High Chancellor, the most important candidate of all, Yuna walked toward the altar with her head held high. Her gown flowed behind her like a river of stars. Her face was calm, but Tay could see the fear hidden in her eyes. She was terrified. She just hid it well. She climbed the steps slowly. She stood before the blade and looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached out, wrapped her fingers around the handle, and pulled. The blade did not move. Yuna pulled harder. Her arms shook with effort. Her face twisted with concentration. But the weapon sat on the altar like it was part of the stone itself, completely unmoved by her strength or her bloodline or her title. After 30 seconds, she released the handle and stepped back. Her face was pale. Her hands were trembling. She had failed. Whispers spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. The princess had failed. The daughter of the High Chancellor was not worthy. What did this mean for the Dominion? What did this mean for her family? High Chancellor Kale sat very still on his throne, his face empty of expression, but his hands gripped the armrests so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Then Lord Voss stood up. "Perhaps," he said loudly, "the blade is tired of gentle hands." He smiled at Yuna with false sympathy. "Allow me to show everyone how it is done." He strode toward the altar, pushing past Yuna without a second glance. His movements were arrogant, his smile confident. He climbed the steps and faced the blade like an enemy he intended to defeat. "I am Lord Voss of the Northern Houses," he declared. "I bow to no one. I fear nothing, and I will take what is mine by right of strength." He grabbed the blade with both hands and pulled with all his power. The weapon did not move, but something else happened. A crack appeared in the ancient altar. The black stone, which had held the blade for 10,000 years, began to split. Voss was pulling so hard, with so much force, that he was destroying the altar itself. "Stop!" someone shouted. "You are breaking it." But Voss did not stop. He pulled harder. His face twisted with rage and determination. More cracks appeared. The altar groaned like a dying animal, and then, with a terrible sound, the altar shattered. The blade of eternity fell. Time seemed to slow down. The ancient weapon tumbled through the air, spinning toward the hard floor below. If it hit the ground, it would be damaged, perhaps destroyed. 10,000 years of tradition, gone in a moment because of one man's pride. Guards rushed forward, but they were too far away. Nobles screamed and stumbled back. The High Chancellor rose from his throne with horror on his face, and in the corner of the room, a servant dropped his tray. Tay moved. He crossed the distance between himself and the altar faster than anyone could follow. His body remembered things his mind tried to forget. The training, the battles, the 1,000 moments when speed meant the difference between life and death. He was a blur of motion, a ghost made solid, a weapon in human form. He reached the blade. Just before it hit the floor, his hand closed around the handle, and the world exploded with light. The light was golden and blinding. Like a small sun had been born inside the great hall. It poured from the blade in waves, filling every corner of the room, touching every face, reaching every shadow. The crystals on the walls caught the light and multiplied it, turning the hall into a sea of fire. Tay stood at the center of it all, the blade of eternity burning in his grip. He could feel the weapon speaking to him, not with words, but with something deeper. Images flooded his mind, memories that were not his own. 10,000 years of history compressed into a single heartbeat. He saw emperors and wars, treaties and betrayals, the rise and fall of civilizations. And beneath it all, he felt a question. Are you worthy? Tay did not answer with words. He answered with everything he was. The battles he had fought, the friends he had buried, the nights he had spent screaming into his pillow because the ghosts would not leave him alone. The choice he had made to put down his weapons and disappear. The weight of survival that he carried every single day. The blade considered all of this. And then, slowly, the light began to change. The wild golden fire became something calmer, something steadier. It wrapped around Tay like armor made of sunlight, recognizing him, accepting him. The blade of eternity had chosen. The hall was completely silent. Thousands of the most powerful people in the galaxy stood frozen, staring at a human servant holding their most sacred weapon. Their minds could not process what their eyes were seeing. It was impossible. It was wrong. It was against everything they believed about the order of the universe. Princess. Yuna stood closest to Tay. She had not moved since the altar shattered. Now she took a step back, her golden eyes wide with shock. "This cannot be," she whispered. Lord Voss recovered first. His face was purple with rage. His pride shattered along with the altar. "Seize him," he screamed. "This human has corrupted the relic. He has poisoned our sacred ceremony. Guards, kill him." The guards hesitated. They had been trained since birth to protect the blade and whoever held it. Their instincts told them to obey Voss. But their training told them something else entirely. Voss grabbed the weapon from the belt of the nearest guard. "If you will not do it, I will." He charged at T, pointing the weapon at his chest. What happened next would be talked about for generations. T moved. The blade moved with him. It was not violent. It was not angry. It was simply precise, like a painter making perfect strokes on a canvas. One moment Voss was charging forward. The next moment he was on the ground, his weapon spinning across the floor. His arm twisted behind his back. Tay had not cut him. He had not hurt him. He had simply stopped him, using the blade like an extension of his own body. More guards rushed forward. 6 of them, armed and armored, the best warriors the Dominion had to offer. Tay moved through them like water through rocks. He touched their weapons, and their weapons fell. He touched their arms, and their arms went numb. He moved between them, and behind them, and around them. Always faster, always smoother, never drawing blood. In for heartbeats. All 6 guards were on the ground, alive but unable to fight. The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles screamed and ran for the exits. Guards formed defensive lines. The High Chancellor shouted orders that no one could hear over the noise. But in the middle of it all, Tay stood perfectly still. He looked tired. He looked sad. He looked like a man who had been forced to remember things he had spent years trying to forget. A voice cut through the chaos. "Stop! Everyone stop!" It was Han. He had climbed onto a table and was waving his arms, trying to get attention. Guards pointed weapons at him, but he did not seem to care. "You want to know who this man is?" Hyun shouted. "You want to know why the blade chose him? Because he is a hero. He is a knight of Earth. He fought in the Siege of New Seoul." The hall fell silent again. The Siege of New Seoul. The name meant nothing to most of the younger Valari, but the elders remembered. Their faces went pale. They exchanged looks of horror and disbelief. "That is impossible," someone said. The war was erased. The records were destroyed. "You destroyed the records," Heen shot back. "But you could not destroy the truth. 20 years ago, your people tried to exterminate humanity. And this man, this human you think is beneath you, he stopped you. He and a few hundred others stood against your entire fleet and won." High Chancellor Kale rose from his throne. His face was unreadable, but his voice trembled slightly. "Is this true?" he asked, looking at Tay. "Were you at New Seoul?" Tay met his eyes. For the first time since the ceremony began, he spoke. Yes, one word. Just one word. But it carried the weight of 1,000,000 dead, 100 burned cities, a species that had nearly been erased from existence. "I was at New Seoul," Tay continued quietly. "I was 17 years old when your ships came. I was 18 when we finally drove them away. I watched my city burn. I buried my family with my own hands. I killed more Valari than I can count, and I wake up every night seeing their faces." He looked around the hall at the silent, staring crowd. "I did not come here for revenge. I did not come here for justice. I came here to forget, to disappear, to live out my days in peace, carrying boxes and cleaning floors until my body finally gave out and I could rest." He raised the blade slightly, and the golden light flickered across the walls. "I did not ask for this. I did not want this. but your blade chose me anyway. Maybe because I am the only one in this room who understands what power really costs. Maybe because I am the only one who does not want it." He looked at Yuna, who stood frozen in place. Her eyes filled with tears she did not understand. "I am Tay of Earth. I am a soldier, a survivor, and a ghost. And I am tired of pretending to be anything less." The hall was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Then slowly the High Chancellor stepped down from his throne. He walked toward Tay, passing his guards, passing his counselors, passing his daughter. He stopped a few feet away and looked at the human who held the most sacred weapon in his civilization. "The law is clear," he said finally. "Whoever lifts the blade has the right to challenge for leadership. The blade has not chosen anyone in 3 generations, but it has chosen you." He paused, his old eyes studying Tay's face. "What do you want, soldier of Earth? What do you want from us?" Tay looked at the blade in his hand. He looked at the terrified nobles, the fallen guards, the broken altar. He looked at Yuna, still staring at him with those golden eyes that he could not forget. Then he looked back at the High Chancellor. "I want to talk," he said, "and I want you to listen." The council chamber was smaller than the Great Hall, but far more important. This was where the real decisions were made, where the future of the Dominion was shaped by a handful of powerful voices. The walls were lined with portraits of past chancellors, their silver faces looking down with cold judgment. Today, those portraits seemed to watch with particular interest. Tay sat at a simple wooden table, the blade of eternity resting across his knees. Across from him sat the High Chancellor, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. Princess Yuna stood in the corner, refusing to leave despite her father's requests. Lord Voss had been removed to his quarters under guard, his political future destroyed along with his pride. The room was tense. Armed soldiers lined the walls, their eyes never leaving Tay. They were afraid of him now. Everyone was afraid of him. Tay found this sad more than anything else. "Speak then," the High Chancellor said. "You wanted us to listen. We are listening." Tay was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. 20 years ago, your people tried to erase mine. You failed. The war was terrible for both sides. You lost a fleet and 10,000 soldiers. We lost millions of civilians and half our planet. Neither side can undo what happened." He paused, looking at the faces around him. "But you did something else, something that made the wound deeper. You erased the war from history. You pretended it never happened. You buried the truth and continued treating humans like we were nothing. Like we were insects, like we did not deserve to share the same stars as you." One of the advisors started to speak, but the High Chancellor raised his hand for silence. "That is what I want to change," Tay continued. "Not with war, not with revenge. I am done with killing. I have enough blood on my hands for 10 lifetimes. But I want recognition. I want humanity to have a seat at your high table. Not as servants, not as laborers. As equals." The advisors burst into protests. "Impossible," they said. "Unthinkable. Humans were a young species, barely civilized, incapable of participating in galactic governance. The Dominion had traditions stretching back 10,000 years. They could not simply hand power to privs." Tay waited for the noise to die down. Then he held up the blade. "Your traditions chose me," he said simply. "Your sacred weapon, your 10,000 years of history, decided that a human cargo worker was more worthy than every noble in your empire. What does that tell you about your traditions?" The room went silent. There was no answer to that question. The blade had spoken. The blade could not be argued with. The High Chancellor leaned back in his chair, looking older than Tay had ever seen him. "You could demand the throne," he said quietly. "The law gives you that right. You could tear down everything we have built and remake the galaxy in your image. Why do you not?" Tay shook his head slowly. "Because I know what that leads to. I have seen emperors and dictators, revolutionaries and conquerors. They all start with good intentions. They all end the same way, buried under the weight of their own power. I do not want to rule. I want to live." I want my people to live. That is all. He set the blade on the table between them. Keep your throne. Keep your titles and your ceremonies. I do not need them. But give humanity a voice. Let us build our own future alongside yours. That is my only demand. The debate lasted for hours. Advisors argued and shouted and threatened. Old laws were quoted, ancient precedents examined, political consequences calculated. Through it all, Tay sat quietly, waiting. He had learned patience in the war. He had learned that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was simply refuse to move. In the end, they agreed it was not perfect. There would be conditions and limitations, trials and tests. Humanity would start with a single seat on the high table, a symbolic gesture more than real power. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had separated humans from the rest of the galaxy. For the first time in 100 years, humanity was recognized as equals. News spread across the station within hours. The human workers could not believe it. They gathered in the cargo bays and the engine rooms, whispering to each other, some of them crying. For so long they had accepted their place at the bottom. They had told themselves it was just how things were, that they should be grateful for whatever scraps the Volari gave them. Now everything had changed. Hune found Tay in their old quarters, packing his few belongings into a worn bag. You did it, Hune said. You actually did it. You changed everything. Tay smiled faintly. I caught a falling sword. Everything else was just talking. Where will you go now? You could stay here. You could be a leader, a symbol. People would follow you anywhere. Tay shook his head. I told you, I am done with that. I just want to go home. I want to see Earth again. Maybe find some quiet place where nobody knows my name. I have spent 20 years running from my past. Maybe now I can finally stop. Hain hugged him tightly. Thank you for everything. I will never forget you. Take care of yourself, Hyun, and take care of our people. They will need good voices in the years to come. As Tay walked toward the shuttle bay, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Princess Yune approaching, alone for the first time since he had met her. She wore simple clothes instead of her royal gown. Her silver hair was tied back in a practical knot. She looked younger, somehow more real. Wait, she said. Please. Tay stopped and waited. Why Yune struggled to find words. Everything she had been taught, everything she had believed about humans and about herself, had been shattered in a single day. She did not know who she was anymore. I was wrong, she finally said. About you. About your people. I was taught that humans were weak and primitive, that you existed to serve us. I never questioned it. I never thought about what it meant. She looked at him with eyes that held no pride, no coldness, only honesty. I am sorry. For the war, for what my people did, for the way I looked at you in that cargo bay like you were nothing. You deserved better. All of your people deserved better. Tay studied her face for a long moment. He saw the sincerity there, the genuine struggle to become something more than she had been raised to be. It was the same struggle he faced every day. Apologies do not bring back the dead, he said gently. But they can help the living. Thank you, Princess. Yuna, she corrected. Just Yuna? I think I need to earn back any title I carry. Tay nodded. Then thank you, Yuna. He turned and continued toward the shuttle. But before he reached it, Yuna called out one more time. Will I ever see you again? Tay stopped at the shuttle door and looked back at her. The golden lights of the station reflected in his eyes, the same eyes that had refused to look away when they first met. The galaxy is smaller than it used to be, he said. Who knows what the future holds? He smiled, a real smile this time, and stepped inside. The shuttle lifted off and carried him away from the ascendant crown, away from the empire that had tried to destroy his people, away from the weapon that had changed his life. Behind him, the station grew smaller until it was just another star among millions. Ahead of him lay Earth, home, and for the first time in 20 years, the future felt like something to look forward to instead of something to survive. Humanity had seized its place among the stars, not through conquest, not through violence, through the simple courage of one tired soldier who had refused to let a blade fall, and across the galaxy. In cargo bays and engine rooms, in crowded quarters and forgotten corners, humans lifted their heads a little higher. They had been invisible for so long. Now, finally, the universe could see them. This was not an ending. It was a beginning, and they were just getting started.